Hi, everyone. This is Vitrin. She is our current post-grad resident here at the Torpedo Factory. My name is Leslie. I'm going to be your camera woman and the disembodied voice you are hearing at the duration of the talk. I normally would be sitting next to her for the Q&A section, but with the current situation, we want to keep our social distancing. So I am going to be the camera woman for this event. And if you hear a random voice, that is me. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to V and what she's been doing here during her residency. She's been working on a really interesting project. So V is a recent graduate of University of Richmond, and she's been working primarily in digital media as well as drawing and a little bit of sculpture as well. So she's going to tell you a little bit about her project that she's been working on during her residency. It's something that's really cool and really interesting. And if you have questions, like while she's talking, feel free to just send them in because we'll have a Q&A section at the end of the talk. So feel free to just ask questions as she's talking, and I'll prompt her later on. So without further ado, I'm going to let V get into it.
Hi everybody, I'm V, and I'm going to talk to you guys about the station, which is the project that I was doing here during my residency at the Torpedo Factory. So the station is part of a series of interactive net art pieces that began with Escape. So Escape takes place after the end of the world in an underground bunker built by the super rich, and it was based off of Plato's allegory of the cave. And so the station takes place after the end of the world in a space station, also built by the super rich. And it is based off of the myth of Sisyphus. So Sisyphus is a Greek myth, and so Sisyphus was punished by rolling a boulder up a mountain for an eternity as punishment for his misdeeds during life. And so his curse is to roll this boulder up the hill, and then it would always roll back down to the bottom. So there are many interpretations of the myth of Sisyphus, but the two kind of most opposite-ended ones are one where his punishment is actually a punishment, and the other where his punishment is actually a test. And so if it's a test, the way to overcome this hurdle is to roll the boulder up the mountain, and every single time it rolled back down, he would take a piece of the mountain with him and bring it back down to the bottom. In this way, he would level a mountain and basically ascend to godhood and become immortal. One of the big problems, though, I found with that interpretation was that it completely ignored the fact that he committed a lot of crimes during his life. I mean, he was he was a murderer, he was a thief, he was a rapist. I mean, he was very Greek. There's nothing else we can say but that. And so I'm using Sisyphus as a sort of vehicle to explore the psychology of the people who built the space station, and the sort of kind of mental gymnastics they have to jump through in order to justify their own beliefs and their own lifestyles and the choices that they've made, namely kind of using their enormous amount of wealth to build a space station instead of saving the world, in essence, from ending. And so the space station mimics the sort of movement of Sisyphus as it orbits the Earth in constant motion, and yet there's no progress ever at all. And this ties into the idea of nostalgia, and nostalgia as a weapon of ideology. There's two kind of main prongs of that argument. One is that nostalgia is a weapon in political rhetoric, and is a threat, in essence, to minorities and historically marginalized people. It's a threat to a return of a time where these people were victims of violence. And secondly, it's a threat, not rhetorically, more culturally and aesthetically, which is where my project really focuses on. And aesthetics are dangerous as a weapon of ideology because they're subtle, and that they bypass your first impulse of critical thinking and kind of slip into your subconscious as a sort of insidious weapon that people can use to control culture and also our own aesthetics, because aesthetics never exist in a vacuum. They're always accompanied by ideas and thoughts and all these things that come along with it. And so I talk about a lot in this project of nostalgia that idealizes history and how the interior of the space station is very nostalgic aesthetically, and what that says about the people who built the space station. So after I conceptualized this project, I kind of did some of my research. So these 4 pieces of research that you see on the screen right now are the basic building blocks of my entire project. I use them both as research, but also as quotable material. So we have The Ethics of Ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir, which talks a lot about freedom and the choices that we have to make with that freedom and the morality of the choices we should make. Postmodernism and Consumer Society by Frederick Jameson. And he talks a lot about nostalgia in the current time period as something that we no longer critique, we just find as aesthetic. The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, he kind of just theorizes that Sisyphus is happy because life is meaningless and so is his task, and we are happy, so he has to be happy. But again, it sort of ignores the fact that he was a bad dude during life. And then there's Them 1 Human Minute, which is a fake review of a fake book that talks about how, that is a composition of this data of how breaking down 1 human minute, but it kind of ignores the fact that you can't measure all human things. Yeah. And so after that, I kind of moved into the visual design because I'm a visual artist, so I kind of start with visual design for this project. And so there's basically 3 different types of visual design that you see in this project. One is art history, so basically from kind of ancient Egypt into the Victorian era, or the historical sort of rooms, thanks to Leslie, who came up with this idea, and she gave me another month of work to add on to here, so thank you, Leslie. And so the art history, though, really speaks to nostalgia through space and time, and also the sort of historical, idealized version that we have of history that's sort of been cemented into it. And then I have the 1910s to the 2020s, which really talks more about the commercialization of nostalgia as well. And this commercialization I've seen more in our pop media, in our advertisements, in our culture, very like Hollywood-esque sort of culture media. And then, of course, I have to move into nature in the future. So this entire project takes place in the future. So I have to figure out what is nostalgia for these people who live on the space station, where the Earth has been destroyed. So I figured that the nostalgia would be nature. And I think that this nature also ties really nicely into this whole idea of idealization of nature, and also what we think of it, as well as this back to the land movement that sort of gets tied into the project as well. And so in comparison to my last project, which was Escape, the layout of the rooms was much more webbed, but this one's very much more linear. And so the linear pattern of this sort of conceptualizes the idea of choice, and ultimately like the structures in which we live kind of are arbiters of this choice, even though the illusion is that you have full choice and autonomy of where you want to go in the space station. Ultimately, you're only heading in one direction, which is kind of sad, but that's the point of this project anyways. And so this linear version of it gives you much more direction, and sort of, again, mimics that sort of movement of the space station over and over and over again. Yeah, so now I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples of these rooms that I've designed. So here we have the Baroque era room. As you can see, maybe the Earth's sort of sliding by. That was just my idea to remind people you're on a space station. But I think the Baroque era room really talks about how we idealize and exaggerate time periods and sort of the grandeur, greatness, and illustriousness of the past. And then, so those are sort of like the more westernized rooms, because these people are very Western-centric. And so now we're going to move a little bit into the historical rooms of different cultures and how they view different cultures. So here we have the room based on Islamic art. And as you can see, they've kind of collapsed 2,000 years of history into one tiny space. And it's sort of very exoticized, very much so. And it sort of just further reveals their psychology and the way that they think about the world. And even though it's very beautiful or aesthetically pleasing, there's a sort of like terrible like undercurrent of what these people are actually thinking about these places. Yeah, and so we're gonna move on to our 1950s room, which is over the top, exaggerated, idealized 1950s nostalgia, like everything you could think of the 1950s and the golden age of American history kind of collapsed into one room as well. So we've got our diner, we've got Coca-Cola, we got Elvis, Marilyn Monroe, and so many American flags, I can't even count them all. Yeah, so that's 1950s. Again, you can see the earth kind of sliding by. And then here we have the 1920s. And so this is a series of rooms that are dedicated more to the art history side of things, very much patterns. And I think it kind of speaks to the fact that we like kind of cut and paste history in order to form our own narratives and fit our own narratives. Yeah, and so now we're going to move into the nature ones. So here we have our nature room as based off of the weather series. So here we have the wind. There's other ones like rain and snow and thunder and lightning as well. And so here it sort of speaks to like this nostalgia that we, I think, as generalized people have, romanticizing nature, and not only romanticizing it, idealizing it, because these people as well idealize it. They take just like the prettiest part of it as well and kind of, they ignore the reality and they instead just focus on it as an experience, kind of like if you went to Disney World, this is what this room is all about for them. Yeah, so that's the weather portion. And then we're moving here into the landscape portion as well. So these are all the landscapes, and they sort of talk more about kind of like sort of like pretty, aesthetic, beautiful spaces that you can just step into at your leisure and explore. So here we have a swamp, and I thought swamp, and then I thought Florida, and then when I thought Florida, I thought, of course, pink plastic flamingo. So we also have a pink flamingo because this is also kind of a satirical piece, and so I thought adding a little bit of humor here and there kind of like breaks through the cynicism that this piece is very much based on, apparently. This also points to the fact that I have no animals in here, even though they're very much part of nature, and it talks to the fact that these people don't like not being in control. Animals are kind of an introduction into chaos for them, and so there are no animals here. It also speaks a little bit about the 1970s Back to the Land movement, this entire idealization of nature and like what the idea of nature is, and the fact that these people, the Back to the Land movement was mostly spearheaded by people from suburbia, especially privileged white people from suburbia, and that they had nothing to lose in these Back to the Land movements. They were mostly just in it because they thought it'd be a great idea. Yeah, and so after all this visual development, I kind of went into the sound design and narration. So first I'd like to talk about Alex and Sabrina, who are our two AI who say all of the narration and accompany you through the entire piece. And they're kind of have this old married couple sort of vibe, and they've been stuck together for 2,000 years, and they're kind of going crazy. But you kind of gotta love them anyway because they're the only ones there with you. But Alex and Sabrina are more of a deconstruction of flawed AI and also flawed technology. It speaks about how technology is created by people and people with biases, and so that technology also contains those biases. So like you have to question, why do Alex and Sabrina have gender norms? Why do they say what they say? As well as why are they so loyal to these objectively terrible people? Because they're logical beings living in a very illogical place. And so then I also use quotations again from my sources. I think these quotations are very good, first of all, because they kind of distance the hand of the author, which is me, from the piece, because as soon as you reveal the hand of the author, the illusion is broken, and so I wanted to kind of keep that immersion a little more. Also, they're very eloquent and a lot of times smarter than me, so it's very good to have that, because I'm 23 years old. I don't think anybody's going to take my authority on anything. So I also quote smarter people also just to show that from Plato into now and into the future, these problems and patterns and social structures continue to exist, and people are continuing to notice them and kind of work on them and try to solve them in essence. And so each of these quotations are usually usually about something like, hey, you shouldn't be a terrible person. And then these people on the space station are like, well, I'm going to be a terrible person anyways. So they have to put spin on these quotations in order to sort of live in the hypocrisy that they currently live in. And so all of this spin is said by the AI, so they're just trying to justify what they're doing by kind of like breaking apart these quotations in the most absurd way possible. And so here you have a formula actually for the narration that I use for a lot. So welcome to the room gets explained what it is, and then a long quote, usually by a philosopher, and then spin from one of the two AI, or character development for the two AI, because I wanted these AI to feel like your friends when they really aren't. Be careful, guys. And then music or a soundtrack that sort of invokes the nostalgia of that time period. So I'm going to play for you guys a tiny little bit of my romantic era piece, both the narration and the sound design. It's the piece of music with it is Schumann's Childhood. So obviously childhood and nostalgia are inextricably linked. So I'm just going to play it for you right now.
Welcome to the romantic era.
An era that features the beauty of nature and the sublime.
As the more we know about radiation, global warming, and the other massive objects that show up on our radar, the more enmeshed in them we realize we are. Knowledge is no longer able to achieve escape velocity from Earth, or more precisely, the surging, towering reality of things. We are no longer poised on the edge of the abyss, contemplating its vastness while leading a...
Cool. So now we're going to move into the 1970s, which is all disco and ABBA and lots of fun. And so I'm just going to play you guys a little snippet of that as well. Yeah.
Welcome to the 1970s.
It's disco.
If man is waiting for universal peace in order to establish his existence validly, he will wait indefinitely. There will never be any other future. I'm trying to talk.
Yeah, so that's 1970s, so a lot of ABBA, as well as a little bit of Jackson 5 as well. And here we have the rain, so the narration, you can see it on the screen. I found a lot of people who actually played this during this kind of like beta testing phase, that people were like, wow, the nature scenes are really relaxing, I like them the most, they're the best, and I'm like, ha, I got you. Like, it's supposed to kind of give you that sense of relaxing and like, oh wow, like, I would love to go there, and I'm just like, I'm a genius because I got you, ha 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 ha. Anyways, I'm gonna play this for you now.
Welcome to the rain.
People used to be able to stand in rain, but now it's so acidic that it will erode your skin. Luckily, a family built a rain simulator just for you to enjoy.
Cultural production has been driven back inside the mind, within the monadic subject. It can no longer look directly out of its eyes at the real world for the referent focus, as in Plato's cave, trace its mental images of the world on its confining walls, if there is any realism left to you.
Cool. And so now, after all the sound design and narration, the very last piece of the puzzle is the actual programming and putting it all together. Firstly, I like to address like a lot of the images are also animated, which was one of my sort of big drawbacks technologically wise, because I actually didn't know how to animate before I started this series. And so I want to talk a little bit about designing around my own inadequacy and my own kind of limitations. I'm definitely not a programmer, and I can't say that I can tell you that I actually don't know how to program, except for this one instance. And so kind of designing around that, I had to know what I could and could not do when I conceptualized this project. And while it was sometimes frustrating, ultimately I found it kind of nice because it gave me constraints on what I could and could not work on. But the main reason why I chose to do this in a digital format, even though I had almost no training in it, luckily the University of Richmond gave me a pretty good basis of all the things that I kind of needed going forward. So a basic training in everything, including digital media. So I was kind of like, yeah, I'm just gonna do it, guys. Why not? And so, but the reason I did this in a sort of digital format is because I wanted an audience to interact with it, and there's just sort of the barrier in traditional media between the audience and the artist. that can't really be overcome. I wanted people to feel like that they had agency in this, and because a lot of my piece talks a lot about choices and the morality that you have for those choices, and how that we are all part of society, and that apathy is really the antagonist to progress. And so all about all these choices that you have to make in the piece are sometimes how choices are limited by our own social structures, which is what this whole piece is, a structure built around you, and sometimes futile because of the certain circumstances that we live in. And at the same time, though, we have a responsibility to make moral choices. Just because the situation is bad doesn't mean that we can just give up and say, well, F it, guys, we're just gonna screw over the entire world anyways. And so you can access my work for free online right now, which is kind of important because I use the internet as a sort of staging ground for my piece. And right now it's kind of the most powerful tool for both preserving the status quo and breaking it. It talks a lot about the internet's history, what we think about the internet and what it actually is. And I think the internet is a new ground for a very old problem. So we have basically recreated 20,000 years of history in the sort of 30-year block, and recreated all the structures and disparities inherent in that history. And I think the internet is just such an interesting microcosm, snapshot of what we are as people. And so I wanted to do a modern piece to basically confront all of these issues that we are currently having. And I think this piece is only fully realized in this context. So yeah, and so what's next for me is I'm going to finish up the series by doing a piece called Atlantis. So I have one underground, I have one in space, and now I'm going to have one underwater. But this one's going to be happy, hopefully, and positive, because I can't lead people down into this dark pit without giving them a ladder to get back out of it again. But yeah, so that's my next piece, and I hope you guys enjoy the station. And I'm really glad to have this residency. To be part of the Torpedo Factory is a fantastic opportunity. It's given me so much more confidence in my work, as well as being surrounded by all these amazing artists. So thank you to the Torpedo Factory again for giving me such a fantastic opportunity. I think we're gonna go over to questions now, I think.
Yep. So, hi, it's Leslie again. I'm the disembodied voice in the background who has been trying very hard not to shake the camera. So I have a few questions for you, and I'd also like to do like a little bit of showing them the rest of your studio. I'm sure they've been seeing the stuff behind you, and I thought I'd like to see. I enjoy how V kind of has all of her ideas like laid out for people to see. So she has her research material here and all of the references for the kind of like philosophical ideas and writings that have inspired the work, which I think is really interesting. That she makes that available for people. And then you can see kind of her idea wall behind the video, and you can see kind of like how she has the evolution of rooms. And here's some more of that again, where she just kind of laid it out on the wall for people to visually see. And she also just has more of her artwork on view as well.
Yeah.
So typically V has the monitor out so people can experience the station. Well, before she had her previous piece, Escape, and now she has the station available for people to kind of walk through. We'll be providing some of that content online so people can still be accessing it. It is on her website as well, so be sure to check that out. And thank you to V for being such a good sport like during all of this. I know it's not really the way you want to end your residency, but I hope it was a good experience
I think
overall.
I think it complements my piece really well. So thank you, world, I guess. Oh, that's terrible. Never mind.
Well, we know what you mean. Like the kind of weird, almost dystopia idea and how everything just feels really strange right now. So I'm going to open it up with a question. And again, if anyone else has questions that you're sending in, we have a really interesting one that I'd like to talk about. But I'm going to go ahead and kind of start us off with, if you can talk about, actually, I kind of want to start with the viewer question first, because they kind of get us to a good starting point. This is from Sabrina. What was your motivation to create this project? Why is it important for your viewers to engage with the concept of nostalgia?
Thanks, Sabrina. I began this project because, first of all, I was a double major at the University of Richmond, so I double majored both in visual arts and in leadership. And I was having a really hard time kind of combining those two interests into one. And I think leadership, first of all, gave me a really good basis for kind of deconstructing these structures and understanding them as well, to ask why and then giving me the tools to figure out why. And I think this project really at the beginning was just a great way to sort of combine the two and sort of talk about it in a way that isn't so, I hate to say kind of confrontational, but a lot of times when we use words, it's confrontational, but when you use art and aesthetics and speak about it in a visual sort of language, it's easier sometimes to access and less confrontational, as well as the fact that few people talk about aesthetics as a sort of vehicle to controlling culture and power and ideology and all these sorts of things, because art is never just the materials that it is and the space that it takes up. It's always worth more than that. So I think my project kind of spoke to that sort of idea, the sort of like hidden value of things, as well as the fact that this piece was important to do on the internet, just first of all because I've been studying a little bit about the internet and it was absolutely insane, but also the fact that the internet is such a new thing that has kind of taken over our lives in such a short period of time, and nobody knew why, how, what it is at all. Nowadays, we know all about like Facebook and how it kind of can destroy democracy if you really want to get down to that. But in the beginning, it sort of was this thing where we thought it was going to equalize everybody, it was going to be great, and it's going to be this egalitarian, democratic place, and it ended up not being that, and it never, when it was conceived, it was never that. And so I think that sort of spoke to the sort of like insidious ideas of what I'm talking about as well, is that these structures exist and they will almost always exist, so we have to be aware of them and we have to counteract them and be active and proactive about them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thanks for the question, Sabrina.
So,
I don't know if I lost you guys there for a last sec.
No, I like what you were saying about how there's always intention behind aesthetics.
Yeah.
Even art for art's sake, there's always intention behind it. There's always a reason it's being made, either by the artists themselves or the person commissioning it.
Yeah.
And that's worth investigating.
Yeah, and even subconsciously, because a lot of times when we think things are pretty, they're not always because we control what we think we are pretty. We are raised in a society that says some things are pretty, and we are raised with these ideas of what we think are aesthetically pleasing. Mm-hmm. And even if we're not consciously putting that into our art, when we do, it shows the environments that we've grown up in, even so. So yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to kind of take it kind of further with that prompt. A lot of your work explores the concepts regarding the convergence of power structures and space and environment. Can you talk about your thoughts on this subject and how that led you to explore these themes through your art and projects like the space station? So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I guess can you elaborate on this idea of the convergence of power structures meets aesthetics and environments that we live in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually the beginning of this sort of interest began when I did sort of this mini student documentary on Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, which is this whole avenue of just Confederate statues that are just lining the streets, and on both sides of these streets there are just houses by these that were built by plantation owners, and a lot of their families still live there. And sort of the idea that these statues actually do mean something to people, and they convey is power, and what they convey is sort of this untouchable aura that they stand so high above you, and that you should in some ways be in awe of it. And so I talked to one of the people who actually lived on that street, and her family was also historically like part of the area, and they built the house that she currently lives in. And the entire house was set up with like a museum and dedication to this history. And when she talked in a way that was so scripted and at the same time so hypocritical, but the words were all so finely tuned that you could, if you weren't careful, you could totally fall into her argument, what she was making about like how the Confederate statue should stay up, and how you should be a Republican essentially, because she was a very staunch Republican. She had a hat and everything. But yeah, so I'm talking though about the internet though, because it was incepted right in the 70s by basically the military-industrial complex, and just in its inception, it was created by what's essentially rich white men who controlled both how it was created and how it was used, and it kind of harkens back actually to the Back to the Land movement and the sort of Whole Earth catalog, which was the kind of first kind of what the idea of the internet is. Democratic information database, totally free and open to anyone. But even so, the Whole Earth catalog was also created by a rich white man who eventually just ended up kind of being kind of crazy. And the entire thing is just like, I just want people to be aware. I want people to be aware and not be blinded by newness, because even if it's new, it still carries over things from our current society and how they are built in the society they are built in. Sorry, I kind of lost track of the actual question there for a hot sec. But
I didn't mind.
Thanks.
So you kind of moved into my second question, though,
Yeah.
which was, can you expand on the role that digital media and digital tools has played in your art process, and how that has influenced projects? Or has it been vice versa? Has your project, like the idea for your project, inspired like the tools that you're using to create them?
It's both, because one cannot exist kind of without the other. But it was definitely, I was trying to kind of play catch up with my whole technological prowess and my technique in all that sense. But I think actually it ended up, my kind of like lack of experience in the technical field and digital media in and of itself ended up helping me a lot, because it kind of narrowed my perspective, and it also made the message that I wanted to convey that much clearer, that much more unified. Very much the technology became sort of the vehicle for the message, and the message was the main point in this, and so the vehicle didn't need to be that fancy. So really, like, if the message is the main point, all you need is like your Toyota Sienna to get the message to where you need to go. So it very much streamlined my process, made it simplified, and made the message so much clearer, because I definitely have a tendency to like overwork my pieces, and sort of like add too much detail, get too fancy with it. Like, let me get real fancy and make a animation on the ocean that looks as realistic as possible. But also, I think like it let me be more explorative with my work, because I had so many entrenched ideas already of what traditional media was. Digital media was completely new to me, and in many ways that was very freeing. I was like, I don't have to be the best, I just have to be as good as I can be. And in many ways that was fantastic, because I could explore ideas. And in a way, digital media is so much better, at least for me, for my message, because what I've been doing is kind of long form art. I don't know if that's definitely not a real term, but definitely like it contains so many different ideas, and it allows me with infinite space and infinite time to explore and crack down and dig out the nuances of the themes that I've been trying to explore, which really can't be done in traditional media. So digital media was allowed me to really have control over how I wanted the narrative of my piece to go. And I think it's like, it was really important for me to be, it's like the difference between having 20 pages to make your argument rather than like 240 characters. I don't actually know what it is, I don't have a Twitter. Yeah, so that's really the difference between what really pushed me into the digital media was just the boundless sort of chances I had to do different things, do anything I wanted essentially. So yeah, so that was nice.
Cool. So how has your art making process adapted to this residency in particular? So as you guys may have seen earlier, she is in a residency studio space here at the Torpedo Factory Art Center, and it is typically open to the public. Right now it's currently not with the whole COVID-19 situation, but the majority of her residency has been a public residency. So people can come in and ask questions. I'm intrigued to see like how people were reacting to this. Were they timid by it? Were they intimidated by it? Were they curious? Did they, as a digital media artist or creator, as you were working in this space, like how did being in a public residency affect that?
It was actually very fun. So people who kind of came in and actually played the game that was set up in this corner over here, half of them were like very, very young / children who were kind of just intrigued and they liked it and they thought it was a video game, so they played it. The other half were like, like normal aged people, and they came in. And I would kind of like, since I like kind of work in the corner over there, I kind of like peeked my head over my screen and I was like, what are they thinking? And all I see is a lot of like a little bit of confusion, but also half the time though people ended up going from that into reading my research material, into reading the actual narration and dialogue and actually going through it multiple times. So that was actually very encouraging to me because I had when I first started the project, I very much had the feeling like nobody was actually going to enjoy it or engage with it in any way. So it was really nice to see that people actually did. But working in a public space actually really helped me in my art practice, because when you have digital media or you have very like conceptually heavy pieces, I feel like it doesn't exist until it really exists, if that makes sense. Like it has no physical form. So sometimes I feel like I'm just making it up, and like sometimes it'll just vanish into thin air. Like I'll wake up from a dream and I'll be like, oh, that was a crazy art piece that I did, guys. Aha, what? But being in a public space let me put up all my research, put up all my like Excel sheets are kind of like over there by the door, like my actual rooms, as well as like my check sheets and my crazy post-it note grid, as you can see back here. And so it kind of made it more real. It made all of the steps that I did actually mean something, because like I said, a lot of the times like digital art can feel like nothing because it's not tactile in a lot of ways. But then people came in, they were like, what is up with this crazy grid of post-it notes you got back there? And I was like, oh, let me tell you, come climb into this hole with me and have some research and existential philosophy debates. So yeah, ultimately, I think it helped me more than it probably helped anybody else, but I had a great time. Yeah.
I'm kind of biased, but I have a background in art history, so I find all of this extremely fascinating. But we have another question from Kim. Have you explored the comics that have animations in them? What are your animation or digital media inspirations?
So I've actually encountered a couple of comics with animation in them. They're actually really, really cool, like digital and web comics. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't like completely gotten into them because I very much get obsessed with things once I like really get into stuff, which is what I'm kind of trying to avoid right now with video games. Like I can see them from the periphery of my vision, but I'm not gonna play them because I'm gonna fall into that obsession pit. But I actually think animation and webcomics are so cool because they combine these two things that like are like really the ultimate storytellers. And what I do is a lot of narratively focused stuff. Yeah, but as far as animation goes, I started off a little bit with like a sort of flash animation and less like computer generated animation. I'm not gonna lie, I wanted to talk a little bit about Disney actually, and how like the live action remakes are kind of like this whole play on nostalgia to get your money kind of thing. So the fact that I'm using a lot of like computer generated animation is kind of making me a little angry at myself, but you gotta do what you gotta do. As far as like actual inspirations for animation, like everything that I've ever watched, all the Disney movies, all the Pixar movies, all the DreamWorks movies, all of like, I don't know, Miyazaki. Yeah, but I find a lot of times animation is super cool when it kind of captures like these sort of quiet moments that you instantly recognize, but then you have to realize somebody drew that frame by frame. And sort of what I'm trying to capture a lot in my animations is just like this sort of sense of placement without being like sort of this floating entity, if that makes sense. So yeah, so as far as animation goes, that's where I'm at right now.
Cool. Are you able to kind of take us through a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just...
We won't do the whole station because there's quite a bit of rooms, but I thought we could do just like a little demo into it. And then when this video is finished, we can put in the comments the link and where to interact or how to see the full thing. So while she gets situated, let me just go through another walkthrough of her studio. Ooh. This is kind of her working out how to move from room to room. And then these are the kind of spreadsheets and calendars and Excel forms that she was talking about, how to get organized and how to move from space to space. So now we're going to just get into a little bit for a little live demo. She's going to be clicking for me. I can't do it because I'm trying to stay socially acceptable distance away. But she's going to kind of walk us through it a little bit.
So this is the very first room. It's an airlock. It's the only room that really has any like actual stuff in it that shows like, oh, these people are actually living in the space station. So it's just an intro. Hold on a second. Let me just figure this out. There we go.
Okay. Yep. There it is.
Cool. Yeah.
And I am Sabrina.
The station was built by the family when the Earth no longer became habitable. Now we stay here until the Earth becomes
So you can see there's two
habitable.
doors that you can
The
choose
station
between.
was refurbished
So let's see, left, right. What do you think, Leslie?
Left.
Left. You're
The
left.
station
I'm
was
left.
designed for maximum comfort. Welcome to the mountain.
We, like Sisyphus, should
So this is the entire room just dedicated to Sisyphus' backstory. It's kind of setting up the argument for the whole station, essentially. Kind of just priming you to think about these things as you go through each room. This narration's like 4 minutes long, so we're gonna... Let's go here. Yeah.
Ooh. Very
Yeah.
80s.
It's very 80s retro futurism.
And the state has no more substance. If he has nothing to sacrifice, there is nothing before him to sacrifice to.
So this is all Queen soundtracks.
I love it.
Yeah, you can hear in the back on the narration. As soon as the narration ends, you get like the full Queen blasting at you. So that's very classic 80s triangles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Islam.
Here we have Islam again.
Like what?
I like the echoey sound effect you have.
Yeah, depending on the size of the room and the material that I sort of thought was in the room, I changed the the effects on the voices, and just to give you a sense of space and time.
Sorry, guys.
Careful.
Oh no. Stepping further away.
Yeah.
So we have another question for you.
Ooh, wonderful.
And I think it's a good way to end it because I think this is something that you probably get asked a lot. I know I've asked you this before. Is there 3D or virtual reality plans for your future work?
Yes, there is. So Atlantis is going to be 3D modeled as well as much more interactive than these two pieces have been, because I wanted to be more positive and optimistic as sort of like not necessarily a solution, because I don't think anybody has a solution to all these problems, but just as a way to give the viewer more agency, as well as sort of differentiating it from these really sad ones into the much nicer Atlantis one. But I think, yeah, absolutely. And I'm a little nervous because trying to learn 3D and 3D sculpting as well as like all that programming is going to be one tough task. But I think it'll really kind of give that sense of difference, as well as the fact that it's more kind of like realistic and you can walk through it. So I'm building an entire model of Atlantis as described by Plato, not the Disney version, like Plato's original writing of it. He's very descriptive, which is nice for me, but there's also like 7 pages of description and one of the actual story of Atlantis, so anybody actually reading is going to be really frustrated. But I'm super excited, and the 3D programming is going to be super fun, and hopefully I think it'll be more interactive and also a tiny bit more entertaining / more fun, so that it's a little more accessible, I think. But yeah, so I'm excited.
I like the immersive quality that would give this. I mean, this is kind of like a choose your own story like video game. There's that movie Bandersnatch that came out where you're kind of just you can go through, but there's only certain outcomes that you could get. It's kind of this constructed idea of it's your choice, but it was also created by someone, so you're still kind of following that path, which is kind of what your work's all about. But at this time, I think we'll probably close it out. I want to thank everyone for watching. We're gonna put some links in with Vi's information with her website, so you can check out everything that she's got online, a little bit more details about her project. You can deep dive into this. Look out for her. She'll be back here at the Torpedo Factory at the end of the year this winter for the Residence, the 2020 Residence exhibition in Target Gallery. So the station will be able to be played there. So that'll be a fun experience. I just want to thank Vi for being awesome. It's been lovely getting to work with you. You're such an interesting and talented person, and I'm really excited to see how this project develops and how your artwork develops as you get more immersed into this. And I want to thank all of you guys for watching, and hopefully you all are safe and cozy at home, and look out for more virtual content from us. We're going to be doing more interviews with artists and more artist demos, that sort of thing. So check us out. We're going to try to be doing at least something weekly, so look for us for your art fix during this uncertain time. But thank you so much, Vi. Thank you for showing us your project. Thank you for putting up with my shaky camera work. And everyone, I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.